For project, we are going to work on incorporating jQuery into the project. We look at it right now. We see that there's a bunch of text on screen. We have some pseudo buttons. They're not really doing anything yet. And what I first want to do is I want to make the text that is visible disappear so that these buttons, I click on Learn More, and then it will make the text show up on screen. Right now, it's not going to do that because there is no JavaScript, jQuery, or anything else running in the project. When I look at the project here, we can see that the script file is indeed empty. If I look into the HTML, I can see that it's standard HTML. Fun stuff going on here where we have some semi-semantic things happening. Now, one of the things that happens when we work with jQuery is jQuery is used to help traverse the DOM, or our document object model. It allows us to access things in our page often easier than with plain vanilla JavaScript. It used to be an almost necessary tool because of browser incompatibilities. So to make all of the browsers, our Internet Explorers, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, each one of those behaved a little bit different when it came to selecting objects with JavaScript and modifying their properties. So to write the JavaScript to make that happen, it was a huge pain in the butt. jQuery came to the rescue and took care of that. Modern JavaScript and modern browsers give us more power than we had in years past, so jQuery is not as crucial, but it does allow us to speed up certain effects and accessing objects in our document with oftentimes clean and easy to read syntax. So that would be a plus for doing it. So even when I'm working with semantic HTML, it works great. A lot of examples you'll find with jQuery, everything suffers from div-itis. jQuery likes to access things that are in divs. So instead of using any type of semantic tags, we put everything in a div, we put a class on it, and then we're using jQuery to access that class. But jQuery is more powerful than that. We can access tags, we can access classes, we can access IDs, so we can access everything. We can even access children, parents, so we can find that relationship between objects instead of being stuck with going, well, how do I get this middle list item here, which we can do that in CSS. We do that with Selector Specificity, so there are some ways to do it. jQuery allows us to access our objects so we can change their properties quite easily, sometimes easier than vanilla JavaScript, so that would be a reason to use it. Now, one drawback on working with jQuery is it requires us to attach the jQuery file to our page. So if we want to use jQuery, we have to load jQuery. And that is the number one reason why there are situations we don't want to use it. Because if we are accessing that and adding that to our page load, our data load of things we have to download to be able to view it, on a desktop computer on a fast connection, no big deal. But as people increasingly are consuming all of their content on mobile devices over wireless networks or cellular networks, that does become an issue. If you're in a place with a bad internet connection and it requires you to download additional assets just to give you eye candy on a page, that sucks. And that would be a reason you don't want to use jQuery and would write your own plain vanilla JavaScript, or you would do everything through CSS, which could be even leaner. So when we're doing just basic UI sugar and candy, there are times where we may want to try and find ways to not do it. But jQuery is a fast and easy way to do it, and that's what we're looking at tonight. Now, I'm linking to jQuery, and then I am linking to my script file that I'm writing for this page. So we need to load jQuery first so that then our main script is going to be able to use it. That will be the sequence that we need to follow. Now, with this, I could download my own copy of it from the jQuery servers, and I could then attach it, put it in my list of JavaScript files, and have it locally contained on my site. And that's fine. But if I link to the file from jQuery.com and someone goes to my site and they've been on a different page that also linked to this file on jQuery.com, the advantage there is they may already have that file cached on their computer or device. And if that happens, they don't take the download hit because they already have access to it, because it just sits in your browser's cache. Once you download it, every other site that uses this file will also be using the same one. Now that's hoping that it's the same version. This is jQuery 3.3.1, which is, I believe, the most current version. But if previously we went to a site that used 3.1.1, we would have that downloaded on our device. Now we download the new one. But every other site that uses this would then also be linking to it. So it can be better to do it this way, where if I put it directly on my site, so I download it and then I just put it in my JS folder, that means they don't have the possibility of having it pre-cached on their device. Thus, it's recommended to grab jQuery from some other site. We can grab it from jQuery. We can grab it from Google has a download site. Microsoft has a download site. There's a number of other mirrored sites that we can use. So there's a lot of places where people are linking to the jQuery code base and putting it on their site. If we choose one of the popular ones like this, then we do have a possibility that people will already have it cached, so they won't have to re-download it. And then that's a bonus in our favor. So that's the HTML. Notice we load jQuery, then we load our script. Now if I look at the script, we'll see that it's currently empty. If I look at the styles here, we'll see that it's just standard CSS, working with the styling the body, H1. I do have a little specificity going on where I'm grabbing the H1 that is directly after body and coloring that differently, so that the My Name Here H1 is different than the About Me, Portfolio, and Skills H1s, so that they display differently on my page. When working with jQuery, there's a common thing that we're going to see happen with it, and that will be the $sign. So we're going to see the $sign reflected in jQuery a lot, because the $sign, once we've loaded jQuery, is going to be how we access it. So we end up using the $sign to access that. Now, one thing that jQuery allows us to do is we're able to set it up to say that we want to only do something after all of the content on my page or my document is ready. So after that content's loaded. Because if we're ever using JavaScript to try and do anything to our page before something is loaded, we can get errors or it will break what happens on our page. jQuery allows us to do it really easy, and we're able to use a document ready statement. So what we can do is we can just simply, with the $sign and then some parentheses, say document ready. And now with this, we're going to call a function. Now within this function, so when the document is ready, now we want to call a function. And there's a couple of different ways that we can write the whole thing. The easiest way is that we create a function that is called main, and then we're going to call that. Now this line right here is going to be the last line in our JavaScript file, this document ready main. Then on top of that, I'm going to create a function called main. It's going to look like that. My ready function is going to call my main function. Now all of the other code that I am going to do on my project is going to exist inside this function. Now this serves a couple of different purposes. One, it encapsulates my JavaScript so it's all in one place. So if I have any other JavaScript going on, anything I write in this function isn't going to be messing with or impacting anything outside of it. So it helps take care of any scope issues so I don't have variables colliding with each other. So that's a big bonus. And it also helps to clean and neaten up what is happening in my project. So now if I want to do something here, at this point, what I can do is access something on my page. So to access anything, we use the $, which says jQuery, and then we put parentheses, and then we now need to specify what we are trying to access. So if I want to access something in my HTML, so if I wanted to say grab this H1 right here, the very first H1, so if I just say H1, we're going to see what happens. Now jQuery has all kinds of really cool things that we can do. We have things where we can make stuff, we can show stuff, we can hide stuff, we can slide things, we can animate things, all kinds of really cool visual effects that we're able to work with in jQuery. So we can do really neat things. And that's part of what makes jQuery nice, is it helps us do a lot of that UI eye candy on our page. So with this, I'm just going to say I want to hide. I want to say H1 hide. Now, what hide is actually doing behind the scenes is it's modifying the CSS property of the object and setting its display property to none. When I use .show, I am setting a display property to block. So it displays it on screen, because then we can use display block, display none as to make something show up, make something disappear, which is what we did on some previous projects. Now if I save this and go back and look at my page, I'll notice that something has happened here. You can see that all the H1s disappeared. So both my name as well as all of the section headings, they all disappeared, because if I go back into the HTML and take a look, we'll see that that's an H1, that's an H1, that's an H1, and that's an H1. All of my headlines have disappeared. Now if I look back here, what I want to have happen is I actually want to make all of my I want to make all of the list of items disappear. So I want those to go away instead of all of my H1s as part of getting my project going. Now if I look at those, I have two ways I could target this. I could target the UL, or I could target it by class. So if I say UL, now if I look, we'll see my headlines are there, and now I have my buttons, but we haven't made the buttons active or clickable yet. So that hit all of them. Now something to keep in mind is I made all the ULs disappear, but that made every UL on the page disappear. Going back to the H1 issue, if I do the H1, all the H1s disappeared. But if I don't want all my H1s to disappear, if I only want H1s that are within a section to disappear, I don't want my main one, maybe I need to do something a little bit different. So just like CSS, we can use selector specificity. So pretty much all the rules of accessing our tags we can do with this. We can also reference things with titles like parent and child and sibling and children and next and previous. So we have a lot of ways we can go about selecting things, and we'll be looking at a few more of those later on this evening. But right now we're looking at how we can just do some basic things. So we can hide things here and make it go away. Now, a cool effect that we could do, and one thing that I'm going to propose is if I disable JavaScript on my page, what should happen is I should see all of my content on screen. So everything that I would be hiding or putting away and I'd have to click a button and make it show, it should go away. So if JavaScript is turned off, all of my page content is visible. And this is one thing that if we are using other ways of making things show and hide, so we're kind of trying to create that one-page effect or control how we spill out information, we can run into problems that it's now usability. If the user has turned off certain things, suddenly they won't get the content on our page, and that's bad. So if we're using JavaScript to enhance the UI, but if we turn JavaScript off and we still get all the actual content, then our page is usable, because we need to think through those situations of when we can't control what the user does, or they're in an environment where their IT shuts off JavaScript for security purposes. We still want them to hopefully be able to see the content on our page. What I'm going to do is do something a little bit different. This time I am going to access the body. Now you will notice I am putting it in single quotes. I could use double quotes here because JavaScript in most cases does not really care. And I'm going to tell the body to hide itself. And then I am going to, oh wait, no, do I want to do the body? Let me just look back here. No, I want to do something else. I don't want to do body. I want to access this class, the class that's on main, though technically I could just access main. I'm going to access the class, and it's called, I put the class of bio. This whole page is a bio page that I'm making. So I'm going to access that. Now you will notice that I'm accessing the class using the dot in front of it. So the same way that we do it inside of CSS. So our specifications, the same way I use body, then caret, and then h1 to grab just one h1. Now I'm using the dot. If we're accessing an I section or something with an ID on it, we'd use the hashtag or pound sign. So we use the same conventions for accessing tags when we use jQuery to grab a hold of something as we do with CSS. So if it's a tag itself, we just do the tag. If it's a class, it's a dot. And if it's an ID, it's a hashtag. And then we can use selector specificity as well. So I'm going to tell bio to first hide itself. And then I'm going to tell bio to fade in. And now when I save this, we're going to see a cool effect. So if I refresh the page, we'll see how the whole page, we'll see how the whole bio section fades in. I'm going to slow it down so we can see it even easier as it fades in. So we get that nice, cool little visual pop. Now, fade in is one of the built-in animation effects as part of jQuery. It's something that was used extensively with jQuery before CSS could adequately fade things in without writing all kinds of really annoying CSS. So it's kind of nice that you can do it through JavaScript with a simple fade in. Now you will notice the number here, it says 2000. The number is in milliseconds. So that's 2000 milliseconds. 1000 milliseconds is 1 second. So this is now a 2-second fade. If I don't put anything here, the default is 400 milliseconds. So slightly less than half a second. So if I refresh, it gives that just that little pop. Having little visual effects like that add to the user experience. They help to enhance the user's experience when they come to a site so it feels more responsive and lively, and the only thing you've done is just kind of slowly, just put a little fade pop on something so it draws attention to it and makes people realize something just happened on my screen. So it's just eye candy sugar that makes it better, but it's not adding any functionality. All it is about the user perception and the user experience. Pop before the whole page is there, I'm going to put it back to the 2 seconds just so when I'm going back and forth between our server page and not, we can see it fading at the bottom there, so then that works out okay. The next thing I want to do is when I look at this, I want to make the list of things disappear, so I have to click on the buttons to make that text show up. So I want to make all of that go away. That requires me to go back and study my HTML and look at the HTML, and we can see what's going on with that. So let's see, we have a section with about, we don't want to get rid of that, description, no. But we'll notice that all of that content is contained in these unordered lists. They have a class of items on them, so we could access it through the list or through the class. The recommendation would be to use the class and not the list, because if I had a larger page or one of these sections had a list within it, if I just say go away, then it makes that go away as well, and then that could be problematic. So we in this case, it makes more sense to have a class on it. One thing you will find is if you look at a lot of other examples of jQuery is everything has a class on it because that allows for very specific and easy access. Anything that is repetitive. So I have these repetitive sections, these lists, these buttons, they're all repetitive. It makes sense to name them the same if they're going to have the same kind of behavior. So my button has a class of button on it. Now it is a div, it's not an actual button tag, and that's part of, as we add some more jQuery in this evening, what we'll find is if I just left it as the button tag, then I can't access the sibling like I want to as easily, so it's better in this case just to set it as a div that we then make look like a button. Some of the purists who want pure semantic HTML will scream at me for doing that, but once you go down the road of using jQuery, you tend to admit to yourself that you've moved a little bit away from pure, clean semantic HTML and have to use some extraneous divs or tags not necessarily in the exact way you want to get the visual effects that you're after, and that's just part of how it goes. So we just have to accept that. So I can see here class of items is on all three of these. So with that, I'm going to go back over here and I can tell my items that I want it to go away. And it's a class, so I use the dot notation on it. And then I can just tell these items I want them to hide. Now let's save that and see what happened, and we can see they did go away. Next thing that we are going to look at is handling a button event. Now, to do this, we will use jQuery's on method that we will look at. So I have my button. Now, this is one where I really would not want to access this by saying, hey, I want to grab this div, because the likelihood of having lots of extraneous divs on a larger page is pretty good. So I don't want to, in my JS, to say, oh, I just want to go grab a div, because that's going to grab all divs, and then that would be bad. So in this case, I'm grabbing my button. Now, if I am using multiple buttons in more places on my page, I may want to have this button have a more specific name and not just be so generic as button. So once your page starts to grow in complexity and volume, you do have to look at how you add in more specific naming to help it work better. So what I want with this button is I want to now say with the on event, and with the on event we're going to do two things. One, I'm going to be looking for a click. Now the cool part is in jQuery we have all kinds of things. We have mouse enter, we have mouse leave, we have mouse or then click events. So we have a lot of actual user input events that we can track and work with on jQuery, which is super awesome. But in this example for tonight, we're just going to be using the click event. And then we end up calling a function, a generic function, that we don't have to give it a name. And then that function is going to do something. So when I click on this function, I want to make something happen. So what I want to have happen when I click on the function is I want my items to show. So we want to make the item show if I click on that button. So if I save this, go back to my page, I click the button, we can see that it shows. So if you're stuck and trying to figure out how to do something, we'll see that there's other options available to us. And a quick simple search auto-populated with show hide, and it said, hey, toggle. Ooh, what's toggle? Look at that. And we see that the jQuery documentation, you might want to go there. W3 Schools, both of those have great resources on jQuery. We'll be referencing them more as things progress. But now back to the page. If I just change this to toggle, and let's see how our page loads now. And now I can click and we can see it works. So Ooh, it's pretty. So it's been pointed out that now we're toggling all of them open, and that's not exactly what we want. Now, one thing though, before we fix that, if I go back to here where it just pops open, pops up, yeah, I don't find that particularly aesthetic. Now, if I go and change it to something like slide toggle, because if we notice we had show and hide, we also have things like slide up and slide down. But now if I have slide toggle, now if I click, we can see how that gives more eye candy. It's pretty. It stretches out, it's prettier. I've got to shorten that. That 2-second load is too long. Slide toggle can also take parameters. So I can now slow it down or speed it up. So we can see how this is now handling the show and hide options that we have, which is pretty cool. So slide toggle is nice. Again, the default, if you do nothing, is 400 milliseconds because that's the default for all of the built-in animations in jQuery. So you can work with that, and that tends to be a pretty decent speed. Things much longer than that, and you start to feel that there's responsiveness issues, like your devices, like it feels like you're on a real slow phone or something where it's not working quite right when you try to experience the page. So you don't want to slow things down too far as you're working with it. It's important when you're working with jQuery, capitalization will kick your butt. It's just something to keep in mind. When words are strung together with function names, they generally are going to be following the camel case syntax, so the second word is always capitalized, not the first word. It's a common way that jQuery strings things together, so that is something to keep in mind when we are working with it. Now, something else that we can do is we can even not just change the showing and hiding of things, but we can also change classes on objects. We can add classes, remove classes, toggle classes. So we have options that we can work with. Now, if I look in my styles, I'll see that I have an active class here where it has a text color and a background color. And I want to apply that when I click on a button. I want the button to add that class to it so that it changes the appearance of the button. So if I go in and select my button, and you'll notice we're probably going to run into the same issue that we had before, that if I change one, I'm going to be changing all of them. So we can toggle a class, again using camel casing, and now I'm going to reference the class name. Now, this time when I'm referencing the class name, I don't use the dot as part of it. I'm just specifying the name because I already said I'm adding or removing a class. So I don't need to put the dot in front of it. So keep that in mind. Now, what really happens is as you start writing jQuery, sometimes you'll put the dot here, sometimes you will forget the dot in front of the thing over here, and you'll realize your jQuery is not working or it's throwing errors, your page isn't loading correctly. What is wrong? And it's just remembering the syntax, and try it both ways until you figure out which one works. It's pretty common if you haven't done it for a while that then that can cause some issues. So now if I go here, we can see my button changed, and it changes back every time I click. Now we are having the issue, it is selecting everything, and that's bad. So we do have to work on addressing that. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to show that we can use jQuery, whoa, wrong key there, to do something else. So I'm going to take on my button, and I can even just modify the text within that button. So I can put text into that button. So if I save this, run over to my page here, and we have an O, because when I hit return, accidentally I ended up with, and that is why you keep the console open. It shows you that you have error messages. And now if I click here, we can see that the text changes. Unfortunately, it's, again, all buttons are being affected, so that is problematic. So to modify our code so that when I click on it, it doesn't affect everything and it only affects the one that I click on, what we have to do is reference it a little bit different. Now, when we are using this function, this is referred to as an anonymous function here, because inside my on, where I say I'm going to use the click event, this function doesn't have a name. So because it doesn't have a name, it's technically called an anonymous function. Now within this anonymous function, it is aware of the item that registered the click. So the item that registered the click is the button, the thing that I clicked on. So knowing that, what we can do is we're first going to worry about this button, then we can worry about the slide toggle part going on there. So we'll just fix the button first. I'm just going to leave those present and just create something else down here, then we'll comment those out. jQuery has an item referred to as this. So when I say this, then what I can do, toggle class on the one that is clicked on. This dot text just changing the text a little bit so we know that this is going to indeed be different. Now I'll comment the previous two out. So instead of referencing it by its class, I'm using this. This is going to be the item that was clicked on, so the thing that registered the actual click event. So now if we save this, and you will notice we are using the word this a few too many times in too many sentences, but that's part of it. Now if I click on one, we can see each one is working. Now, all of our lists are still showing, so we need to take care of that. And I don't like already viewed. I'm just going to leave it as viewed. Now, there would be some ways that we could make this more complex, so we could figure out if it's the first time something's been viewed. If so, then we change it. Or we can wait until we close it and then we can change the text. So there's some more complex things that we could do, but for now we're just going to leave it. Or we're just toggling it and changing the text. But we get to reference this object. Now, the next thing that we can do when we click on it is we can now access this again. And I want to gain access to the next item after what was clicked on. So if I look at my button, the next item is my list with the class of items on it. And that's what we want to be able to toggle. jQuery has a really nice built-in function called next. And then we can just slide toggle that. We'll go for the speedy toggle of 100 milliseconds. Now when I look at my page, I can see we've now taken care of it, so only one is showing. Change up at the top here, I left the old code, commented it out, and then I modified something. jQuery supports chaining. This is where we're able to take and combine together multiple commands. So instead of having these two lines as separate, where access bio and hide it, access bio and fade it in, you can say bio, first I want you to hide. When you're done with that, then I want you to fade back in. So that can be a way to write cleaner, neater code. Now, sometimes it's easier to leave everything on separate lines so you can see the sequence of how things are showing up on screen, but there are times where we do want to chain it together where it makes sense to do so, especially like on bio here. So that makes sense to do it that way. So we can see it still performs the same. The page loads in, it fades, and then these are working. When we're working with jQuery, it's important to remember that it's best to encapsulate your functionality into a function and then use the document ready so all of your assets load before the page tries to do anything. That's going to work better for you. The jQuery ready function is good in how it works with and loads assets and monitors that, so it helps to make your page work efficiently. So you're recommended to always use that. You don't want to just put your script at the bottom of the page, just put the jQuery commands in it, knowing that you loaded jQuery and then your script runs. Because if you have this line of text here, followed by this next line, jQuery may be in the process of loading, but it may not have finished loading from the server. And then it loads your script, but it doesn't have access to the jQuery, and it will throw lots of errors. So if your client has spotty internet, that could be a problem. That's why anytime you're using jQuery, you always want to make sure that you have loaded it. So use the document ready before you try to do anything. That's one of the easiest things to forget when you are working with jQuery is you put the little link into jQuery. Actually, forgetting to put the link to jQuery is probably the #1 reason why jQuery doesn't work on your site. You forget to put it on the HTML because you're too busy and excited to write the jQuery. Then it's not waiting for things to load before trying to use it. So that's why we want to use ready. And then we have the content that we're loading. When changing the CSS, it's generally recommended to add and remove classes or use toggle class over accessing and changing CSS properties directly. jQuery does allow you to change CSS properties. You can change one or multiple properties very easily using a .css, and then you specify what you're trying to do, and it works really well. But more often than not, it's better to have your CSS in a class in your CSS file and just reference that class. That's going to be the preferred way of managing your project. You're separating out the presentation, the CSS, from the JavaScript, which is just controlling when that presentation happens. So that's the better way of doing it, but jQuery does support full access to the CSS, so you can reference the CSS and change each individual property directly in JavaScript with jQuery. But the recommended way is to add and remove or toggle classes. You can have events. Now you'll notice I put the word event in the function here as a parameter of it. So the event that happened is we clicked. So this anonymous function, I can pass that event object into it, and I can now reference that event, the event that was clicked, and I can say I want the current target or the thing that was clicked on. So I can say event.currentTarget instead of using the word this. And that is an acceptable way of writing my code. So we can make that happen with it. So I can use this, or I can use event.currentTarget, but I do have to put the word event here so I can pass the event object into this anonymous function. If I don't have that there, then this word event is meaningless because it has no reference to anything. Now sometimes you will see some programmers write event, some will write EVT because they want to shorten it. Some will even just write the word or letter E and just say e.currentTarget. It's all personal preference. Some like to write it out verbose because it is then very apparent. This is an event object. The event object's current target, the thing that was clicked on in this case, we're going to toggle its class. Or we're going to change this to event current target. We'll say the thing that was clicked on, grab the next item in my DOM and apply a slide toggle to it. All is good. So arrow function syntax, I can use event in or not in parentheses. It will work both ways. So we can look at the event object. We use the arrow function notation instead of using the word function in front of the parentheses for the object that is being passed in. And then we use event current target, but we can't use this. If I want to use the word this to reference it, then we need to use the old notation of function with parentheses on it. If I use event, then this will work as well because the current target is accessible. Or I can use this.